It's hour 3 of lesson 4, and we've done a lot of the heavy lifting in doing our database design. Again, you're going to need to do this in assignment 2, but you're free to reach out if you need some help. Strongly recommend you visualize this using an ERD to diagram it out so you can actually see your models and relationships in terms of planning them out. Okay, so we've got to do 2 more steps before we can actually generate the database tables. First of these 2 steps, and I've outlined this in the slides that are here on D2L, is we need to open up our database connection class. So when we created the project using the MVC template and we chose individual accounts for authentication, Visual Studio actually gives us, it generates or scaffolds a database, a DB context object. And that file is located in the data folder and it's called application DB context. And there's actually code in our application that passes this at the time of startup. So we're going to open up this file. If you expand your data folder, you'll see this application DB context. So let's open this. So the class name is application DB context. It uses the identity framework core. So identity framework is the database access library that we use to get our web application to talk to a database. So it's sort of like the PDO library in PHP, but a lot more powerful. We've also got a second dependency, which is the identity ND framework, and that's used for managing user identities and security. So we're going to work with this file in a minute. So where does this file get invoked? It actually gets called in the startup.cs. So this is our startup class. It's code that runs when our application loads. And right here on line 30, we can see that our services, we are adding our database context and providing some options. The first option is what kind of database are we using, which is SQL Server, and where does the connection string live? So it's looking for a connection string called default connection. Where do we find that? That's in our appsettings.json file. So right now on line 3, it has sort of an in-memory database, calls the connection string default connection, and it points to an in-memory database that got created when we set up our project. We're not going to use this. We're going to be modifying this in a couple minutes. But we do need first to make a change in this application DB context. So in here, declare a DB set object for each of our models so we can easily perform thread. So we have 5 model classes. You can see the 5 tabs: open, category, book, card item, order, and order detail. So I'm going to use this object called the DB set. And we'll see what Visual tells us. It's part of the Entity Framework Core class. It's an entity that can be used to query and save instances of that entity. So when we declare a DB set of type category, and I'll give it the name of categories in plural, we can use this object to perform create, read, update, and delete operations against the database. And this DB set, what's neat is it has built-in methods like add, remove, find, list. So we don't actually have to write any SQL code at all to interact with the categories table. This DB set, it's already got built-in functionality to do all of those things. Well, Mason, Microsoft is all about making it easier for us, right? What's the repetitive stuff that we would have to do manually and that was error prone? And they wanted to automate it. So if we design and structure our applications well, we can leverage this functionality. So now we need 4 more DB sets. So I'm going to create one for our book model called books. That's readable and writable. One for our cart item model. One for the order model. And one for the order detail model. So we're going to add these, create these 5 global DB set objects, and we declare them here inside our database connection, because all of these, all the CRUD operations, obviously we need to use this database component. We've also got 5 red lines. And Visual Studio asks, are you missing a using directive or assembly reference? And we are, because notice we're in the data folder here, right? Our namespace in the data folder, here's our application DB context. So our namespace is our project name.data. These classes live in the models namespace because they're in the models folder of the project. So we're going to need to add a reference. So I can mouse over any one of these and accept the reference suggestion. We need to make a using statement to reference the models namespace here. So when we add this reference on line 6, our red errors disappear and our class names turn blue because now these are recognized. Yes, Chris. So the DB set names are plural because these are going to be the table names that get generated in a moment. So remember, thinking of our model, the model is like a template. It's used to instantiate a single object. But the DB sets are for working with the entire list in the database. That's exactly right. Okay, so we've done step 2 now. We've built the models. We've declared the models in our application DB context. We've declared instances of these with this DB set object. And again, the DB set will do our create, read, update, and delete operations for us. So that brings us to this step, which is adding our database connection to the Appsettings.json. So I'm going to show you this both working on my local database, and then I'm also going to do it later to my Azure database. For your bookstore, you can just use the local database. It doesn't have to go on Azure. But for your assignment, so this will be the local connection string. But if you're using Azure for your assignment, your connection string is going to look like this instead. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to go to Solution Explorer, and let's open up Appsettings.json. So I've got this value here in red with this in-memory connection string. I'm going to wipe it out. We're not going to use this. I'm going to delete that and just replace it with a set of single quotes. So I'm going to give you the local server version first. So it will be server equals, and this is not case sensitive, by the way, because it's Windows. And this would be where you would enter your computer name if you're connecting locally. So how do I find it? Well, in Management Studio, it actually shows me. Here's my local server. So my local server is GC7. Still haven't learned the server name yet. QH. So there's my server name. You could find your own server name, which is typically your computer name, in Management Studio if you'll see it here. Now, locally, I can use Windows authentication, right? I can just connect here. I don't need a username and password. My database is called The Last Chapter, which I created at the end of class last week. So here's my local server, and here's the Last Chapter database I created last week. So I want to connect my web project to this database. Now, because I'm working locally and using Windows authentication, I can just use integrated space security equals true. So this means just use my Windows login. So this will work locally, it won't work on Azure. So your connection string is going to be the same, should be the same as mine. If you're working locally, the difference is your server name. And again, I've put these slides are on D2L, and on slide 8, you can see the different connection strings. So the local one is like this. I'll put it in the chat as well. And obviously, you would replace your computer name and your DB name with your own values. So I'm going to save that. And now my project should be all ready for us to run the database migrations tool. So the migrations will inspect our 5 models, including the relationships. Yes, there is a space in integrated security. That is not a typo, but thank you for checking, Megan. That space should be there, which is a little bit weird. So we're going to run the migration, and it will build 5 tables with the relationships in the database. To read more about the migrations, yeah, there's a walkthrough here from the MSDN. Actually, this one's a little old. I'll update that reference actually a little later. So how do we actually run this? If you click on the Tools menu and choose NuGet Package Manager, it'll then open a submenu, and the first item here is Package Manager Console. This is a small PowerShell window inside of Visual Studio. So again, you can see the menu tree, Tools menu at the top, NuGet Package Manager, and Package Manager Console. That's going to open this window. Visual Studio is initializing PowerShell. And it should show the default project. I only have one project here, so it should show my Last Chapter project. So I'm going to run 2 commands here. It's a 2-step process to build the tables. And you can see the commands here. The first command is add-migration, and then we name the migration. So it's kind of like a git commit message, although it can't have any spaces in it. So we're describing the changes we want to execute in our database. So we're going to run that command first, add-migration, and then a space, and then we'll give it a name. So I'll run add migration and then a space. I'll call it create bookstore tables. And then after that command, I'm just going to hit enter. So Visual Studio will compile the site. And now notice there's a new tab open here. So inside the migrations folder, inside the data folder, there's this migrations folder as well. And now I've got this file here. It's got the current date and time. and it took the migration name and it created a file with the same names, timestamped, and it says create bookstore tables, and it's a C# file. When I open it up, if we scroll through, what's going on inside this file? What will this code do? It hasn't executed yet. But what does it look like will happen? Yeah, exactly. It's going to create the tables based on the definition of our model classes. Exactly. So not only does it create the tables, it sets out the keys, the identity. This is like auto increment in MySQL. Sets out all the validation rules, primary keys, and foreign key constraints. So we've created the migration, and then to execute any migration against the database, we just run this command, update -database. And again, this PowerShell, it's not case sensitive. So now I'll run the command update -database, and it's going to try to use the connection string in appsettings.json and execute this script in my local database. Hit enter. We'll build again. And it says, okay, cool, done. Okay, Jacob, I will come back to that. Yes, common issue. So did this actually work? Well, if I go to my database and expand the tables, I now have my 5 tables. So here's the books table. Right? It's got all the columns. It's got my primary key, foreign key. We've got categories. So Visual Studio took a replica, copied the models and the relationships, and it's now copied them into the database for us. Jacob, I'll come to your issue in just a moment. We've also got a bunch of other tables here. What the heck are all these tables that start with ASP.NET? Where did these tables come from? We didn't create models for any of these. So maybe, does anybody have any idea what these tables are and how they got here? Sam, you are exactly right. Remember when we created our project, we changed the drop-down list from no authentication to individual accounts. So when we do that, Visual Studio does many things for us, and one of them, notice there's another migration that's already here. So this is the one we just created, this create bookstore tables, but there's also a migration here that says create identity schema with no timestamp. And if we open that migration, this is creating a bunch of tables here for, as Sam said, authentication and authorization. There's a roles table, there's a users table, and notice the users table, I mentioned earlier that our customer ID in our orders, right, we set it as a string, not an integer. This is why, because the ASP.NET users, for the IDs, it generates like a long random string for each customer, each user ID. It doesn't just assign ID 1, 2, 3, etc. So we've got things like a password hash, a salt value, whether 2-factor is enabled. All this stuff is, again, built in. Right, Mason? Feels like cheating. So when we scaffold, not only do we get our own models copied to tables, but we now already have all these built-in tables we can use and leverage for managing security. Okay. The salt value is the security stamp is actually used as the salt value. Or Megan, are you asking what is the salt value? Okay. Anybody, that is a good question. What is the salt value? We'll talk more about it in lesson 6. But anybody have an idea what is salting when it comes to user security? Does anybody know what salting means? Sam, you're on the right track, yes. Let's see. Maybe I can find a diagram to explain. Okay. So if we're going to hash passwords, right, let's say 2 people both enter the same password. If we just hash them, then the word Bob will get converted to something like this. The issue is if we have 2 users and they type the same password, their hashed value might be the same. So a salt value is like a random string that's used as part of the hashing algorithm. So even if 2 users give us the same password in plain text, it gets hashed differently. So this helps ensure uniqueness. Does that help, Megan? So it's a way of creating stronger passwords. And of course, that's built right in to our table. So not only are we going to have a password hash, but we're also going to have a salt value. Well, the salt value is included in the hashing algorithm. So Megan, if you and I both enter the same password, we'll both get a unique salt value, which means our ultimate hash passwords will be different. It's a way of ensuring uniqueness and a stronger hashing value. So now I will show you, we've done a lot of work to get to this point. Yes, the salt is stored as in the security stamp field. So the salt gets stored along with the hashed password. Okay. We can look a little more at this. It could be, yes. Could be. They're designed to be kept secret, yes. So I've got the tables now. And now we're going to do something that, Jacob said, okay, Jacob, sorry, your issue. Cart item has no key. One thing to check, Jacob, is whether the primary key naming convention has been followed in your cart item class. So if you call this field cart item ID spelled this way or ID, the migration knows this is a primary key field. But if you name it anything else, then it won't get identified as a primary key and you can get that error.
Yeah, just my cart item ID looks exactly like that.
Okay, so it's in Pascal case, so capital C, capital I, and everything else is lowercase?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wait, never mind. I spelled it wrong.
Okay, yep, try it again. You can just create the migration and update the database again. Give it a try, it should be okay. So now we're going to do something. One of my students in my class on Thursday was horrified that we did it. I actually want to delete the categories folder under views and all the views we've created, as well as the categories control. We're going to delete and we're going to regenerate them. And a student on Thursday was horrified that we deleted the work, but don't worry, you can still go and get the old files you need. They're tracked in the Git repository. So even though we're going to delete and regenerate these files differently, if you just go into our repo and you want to see the files as of week 2 or 3, you can just always go and get them. And they'll still be here. So in Solution Explorer, under Views, I'm going to delete the Categories folder and the 3 views inside of it. I'm also going to delete the Categories controller. And now we're going to use the Visual Studio Scaffolding tool to regenerate these. And they will be better than the ones we created manually. And in your assignment, this is all you have to do to create the controllers and the views. So I'm going to right-click the controllers folder. I'm going to choose Add Controller. So we did this last week, but we're going to pick different options this time. Last week when we made the categories controller, we picked the empty controller. This time, we want an MVC controller with views using Entity Framework. You can see the description. This will give our controller actions and razor views for doing create, read, update, and delete using an Entity Framework data context. So this is what we want. We'll just click Add here. So now we get this little dialog, and it asks, what model do we want? So we're going to base this controller. It's going to work with the category model. And as soon as I choose the category model, it gets a plural name of categories controller. And the second dropdown is asking for a database connection class. Which database connection do we use? Well, we've only got one. So we're going to select our application DB context. And then we'll leave all of the 3 checkboxes over on the left. We're going to leave all of those selected. We want views, we want to use our JavaScript, and we want to use our default layout page. So all you have to do is just make those 2 choices at the top. Category model, application DB context. When that's done, just click Add. And Visual Studio is going to run its scaffolding tool. So scaffolded just means code generation. So in your assignment, you're going to design the models and the relationships. You're going to use migrations to create the database, but then you can just scaffold the controllers and views. So what's in here? We've got a controller with a constructor. Our constructor takes an instance of our database connection. You can't use this controller without a database connection. And then there's a bunch of methods here. There's an index method, details, 2 versions of the create method, a get and a post, 2 versions of an edit method, again, a get and a post, and 2 versions of a delete method, a get and a post. And you can see all of these are using this categories DB set that we declared in our database connection, because this object has all the built-in create, read, update, and delete code. So how does this work? Let's compile the site. And I'm just going to go back and click on my categories link. Oops, I think I just have to start my server again. So now when I click categories, I get this page. It says index. And I've got this option here to create a new category. It loads a form on categories/create. It hides the primary key. If I try to save a blank category, the validation we put in the model fires. Okay, so let's add some categories. What should the categories be in our bookstore? Let's try and save some. Yeah, for me, Mason, it's a no-brainer. Okay, so we've got horror. And it adds. We've got comedy. Yep. We've got fantasy. Let's put in general a nonfiction. What about these edit and delete? Right? Can I go in and edit? When I click edit, it pre-fills in a form. I can save and update. Yeah, we got science fiction. That's probably good enough. You can put in any categories you like. If I want to delete something, I can add it. It gives me a confirmation on a new form. Delete, it's gone. So if I look in my database, I can just right-click my categories, choose select my top 1,000 rows, and we can see here are our categories in the database. So the scaffolding lets us generate working code with the user interface really quickly. Now, this isn't finished. It wouldn't be like, you wouldn't hand this to a customer and say, okay, your bookstore is done. We'll still want to make some changes to this, but it gives us a great place to start. So the key really is getting the models right. So let's go and add a few books now. Let's create a books controller with views and then see if we can add some books to the store as well. And then the last thing I will do is actually connect this up instead to my Azure database and try it there as well, which you don't need to do, but I want to show you that process for your assignment. So now we want a books controller with views. So I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer again. I'm going to right-click controllers. We're going to do the exact same process we just did with the categories controller, but this time we'll make the books controller. So let's add a controller. Again, we'll pick the third option, controller with views using Entity Framework. Why? Because it's awesome. As Mason will tell you. We'll click Add. All I have to do is select my model. So this time it's the book model. All the other options get filled automatically. They default to the last selection. So our data context is here. Our checkboxes are checked. And our controller is named appropriately. We'll click Add. We get a books controller that's going to look very similar. And now in views, so here are the 5 category views, and we've now got 5 book views. So we should now be able to try and add some books. So I can just change my URL from categories to books. Whoops, I need to compile my site first. So I'll build the solution. So now here's our books index. It gives us the title. It even has the parent category. So let's add some books here. So right now I'm reading a book by Adam Grant called Think Again. But why it's good to discover you're wrong and change your mind. I got it from the library, so I didn't pay for it. But I don't know. And notice, under category, we now have a drop-down that's automatically populated with the categories. Because we modeled the relationship, we said one category has many books, and one book has a parent reference of category. It means we automatically get the drop-downs filled here. So I can create my book, and without writing any SQL or doing any kind of join, our page not only shows the book info, but it also shows us the name, not just the foreign key ID, but the actual category name of the parent, which I think is pretty cool. Let's put a few other books in the store. Tell me what else, what are you reading these days?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
So like, does the when scaffolding, right? And based on, for example, we did a Boolean mature content. Based on the fact that it's Boolean, did it, like, from that alone, it decided that it should be a checkbox?
That's exactly right. Yep. So it interprets the model and the data types and generates the forms accordingly. Yes. So
Okay.
if I put in, let's say, even ABC for price, it's going to tell me, nope, that's no good.
And it's because it's inheriting a list of categories. It's going to show a drop-down menu.
That's right. You got it. Exactly.
All right. Thank you.
So let's add a few more books to the store. What else did you want to add? What else are you reading these days? Okay. I think I read that in grade 9. Great book. I'll just make up a price. I guess, Adam, maybe it's not quite science fiction, but maybe we'll categorize it as that. We could always add more categories. Okay, anybody else? Tell us something else you're reading that we can put in the library or the bookstore. Okay. And it's, the deal is that J.R. Tolkien. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay. And the price, we can put in whatever you like as the price. So we'll put that in as fantasy. So we'll probably put some more books in here later, so that when we click a category, we'll want to have a number of books. So I'll probably populate this out with more stuff. Actually, I'll add one more. This not long ago. I just want to have a few more books, so I might populate some more stuff into here. So this is working with my local database. You can see how fast it is. So what about, how would I do this? What would my database connection look like if this was my assignment and the database was running? I wanted to use the database I created in the Azure portal. So I'm just going to show you that now. You don't have to do this with yours, but I want to show you the process, take any questions, and make sure this gets recorded. So the first thing I would need to do is change my connection string. So I would need to use this format instead. Still going to have the server and database parameters, but instead of using integrated security, I would have to supply the username and password that I created for my database in the Azure portal, which we did last week, and I put it in a file. So I should probably open up my file so I can double check my credentials. I think I remember them, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay. So I'm going to go to my appsettings.json. I'm going to change my server name here. To my Azure server. The database name is the same, but instead of integrated security equals true, I need user ID with a space equals and then I need to put in the username and password with user space ID. So I have this database already set up in Management Studio. I saved it last week. So I can connect to it. I have a last chapter database here, but when I expand my tables, notice it doesn't run nearly as quickly as the local database either. There's nothing here. So what I need to do is update my database again in the Package Manager console. So go to Package Manager console. And now I will run update database. So this will execute those two migration files, but now it's going to execute them against my Azure database instead. So it tells me it's done. And if I go back to Management Studio, so now I have all my tables, but they're going to be blank. Right? So I've created the tables here in Azure. So now my categories, it's blank again. So I would have to populate it, for example. So for your bookstore, you can use the local database. It works, it's faster. But for your assignment, you'll need to use the Azure connection string instead. And again, I've documented in this slide that's on D2L, I've documented the different connection strings for you. You probably don't need this one. This is using SQL Server, but locally, which I don't. Using SQL Server authentication locally, which probably nobody is doing. So we've run the migrations. You can also do the reverse. You could build your database first and then generate the models from it. It can be done. So there's a link here if you want to check that out. It's not as common. So if you want further readings on the migrations, they're here. Now, I did have one question from class last week that I should probably address, which is what happens if we need to change the model, right? So we've used the model, we've already built the database. What if we realize, we want to add a new column or we want to add some validation or something like this? So let's say, for example, let's go to one of our models. So maybe in the book model, maybe we decide the book title, because right now the book title, it's, I think, max length, which is like thousands and thousands of characters. It's too big. So maybe we want to limit the book title down to like 500 characters. So if I want to change something in my model, set the max length to 500 characters. And now I can just add a new migration and update the database. add a migration, set book title length. So this is going to run an alter column command. It's going to change the old data type from nvarchar max to the new data type of nvarchar 500. And I can just run update database again. It's complete. If I go and refresh, my title is now 500 characters. So we are not locked into the database schema with using the migrations tool. If we change something in the model, we want to add a new model or make a change, we just then add a new migration and run update database, and that migration will modify the database structure. So our web project, our models, and our database tables, they're always in sync. Okay. I think for now, I'm going to put my database connection back to working locally. No, actually, maybe not. I'll leave it for now. Just take that out. So I'm going to push everything up to GitHub. So if you need anything, so we change lots of files here, lesson 5. Scaffold controller views. We will do the other controllers. Okay, if you want to do it manually, Megan, you can. You don't have to use the migrations. So if you want to build some tables and just populate them directly in your database, you can just build a model that maps to it. That's fine. Okay, so Jacob, I did add migration, and then description here. And then I did update dash database. So the exact same two commands as before, I just use a different description. Okay, so all the code from today is on GitHub now. So my plan is to have next week's lesson done next Tuesday, probably later in the day, but I will email the class when the lesson is done. I've got lots of office hours available next week. If you need help with your assignment, you can also send me an email. So you should be thinking about your data model, designing your entity relationship diagram, and you should be able to now start to create your model classes and use the migrations to generate your database tables. And then you can just scaffold the controllers and views. So next week in our asynchronous lesson, we're going to do a few things. Number one is we're going to customize what the scaffold gives us. And number two, we're also going to look at deploying this whole web application to the Azure portal. So those things will be recorded in the asynchronous lesson for next week. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope you all have an excellent long weekend. I have time this week and next to help you on your assignment if you need it. So please reach out. I'm happy to connect with you on that. Okay, have a fantastic week, everyone. Enjoy the long weekend and watch for the asynchronous lesson to be posted next week. Yes, Ivan.